High above the Red Sea, an African empire rose from the misty highlands and entered the world of Rome, Persia, and Arabia. Aksum minted gold coins bearing the faces of its kings, controlled powerful trade routes, raised stone monuments that still defy easy explanation, and sent armies across the sea. Yet today, much of its story remains forgotten. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy ancient history, lost civilizations, and mysteries buried by time. This is the story of Aksum. At first light, the highlands seem to rise out of another world. Dark ridges break through drifting mist. Volcanic plateaus fall away into deep ravines, and narrow paths cling to slopes where a careless step can send stone rolling hundreds of feet toward the valleys below. Far to the east, beyond the mountains and the dry escarpment, the Red Sea glimmers like a blade under the sun. Between these heights and that water, an empire will eventually emerge powerful enough to mint gold coins, command trade across continents, invade Arabia, destroy kingdoms, and present itself as an equal to Rome and Persia. Yet nothing about this landscape appears designed for empire. It is difficult, fractured, and severe. That difficulty is precisely what makes Aksum possible. The heartland of Aksum lies across what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, where the African highlands meet the routes descending toward the Red Sea. The region is neither fully isolated nor easily invaded. Its elevation provides cooler temperatures than the lowlands below, while seasonal rains make agriculture possible on the plateaus. Farmers cultivate grains such as wheat, barley, and teff, raising cattle, sheep, and goats among fields divided by stone walls and rough terraces. Water is never entirely reliable, and the soil demands constant care. But the land can support dense communities when managed well. In a world where control of food means control of people, these highlands offer the first essential foundation of power. They also offer protection. Armies moving inland from the coast must climb steep escarpments, cross dry country, and follow narrow corridors where supply becomes difficult. The mountains do not make conquest impossible, but they make it expensive. Communities established on the plateau can look outward without remaining permanently exposed. They can gather wealth from distant trade while keeping their political centres far from the vulnerability of the shoreline. This balance between access and defence becomes one of Aksum's greatest advantages. The landscape is not empty before the rise of the kingdom. For centuries, people have lived, farmed, traded, worshipped, and built across these highlands. Archaeological evidence reveals settlements, stone architecture, pottery traditions, inscriptions, and religious practices that predate Imperial Aksum by generations. Some of these communities maintain connections with southern Arabia, only a relatively narrow stretch of sea away. Sailors and merchants move between the African and Arabian coasts, carrying incense, livestock, tools, ideas, scripts, and styles of worship. Temples and inscriptions in the region sometimes resemble those found across the Red Sea. Yet the societies taking shape here are not simply foreign colonies transplanted onto African soil. They develop within a deeply local environment shaped by indigenous populations, African languages, regional farming traditions, and political systems that scholars still debate. This uncertainty matters because the old habit of explaining African achievements through outside influence has distorted how Aksum has often been understood. Earlier interpretations sometimes imagined that civilization arrived fully formed from Arabia. The surviving evidence tells a more complicated story. Contacts across the Red Sea are real and important, but influence moves in more than one direction. The sea connects rather than separates. People cross it, return across it, intermarry, exchange customs, and reshape imported ideas to fit local needs. What emerges in the northern Horn of Africa is neither purely Arabian nor sealed off from Arabia. It is an African society growing within an international zone. Long before Aksumite kings placed their faces on coins, the region already sits near some of the ancient world's most valuable resources. Ivory travels from the African interior, gold moves through networks extending toward the Nile and beyond. Aromatic resins, hides, tortoise shells, rhinoceros horn, and exotic animals attract buyers from distant markets. Some goods come from the highlands themselves, others pass through the region from lands farther south and west. The power of the future empire will depend not only on producing wealth, but on controlling the places where wealth changes hands. The Red Sea is the key. To modern eyes it may appear narrow, almost enclosed, but in antiquity it is one of the great commercial corridors of the world. Ships travel north toward Egypt and the Mediterranean, east toward Arabia, and south toward the strait leading into the Indian Ocean. From there, merchants can continue toward India and ports even farther beyond. The winds are seasonal, the reefs dangerous, and navigation uncertain, yet the rewards are enormous. Roman merchants desire spices, gemstones, ivory, incense, and luxury goods. Indian traders exchange textiles, beads, and metalwork. Arabian ports profit from controlling access between seas. Aksum's future is tied to this moving world of sails, caravans, interpreters, customs officials, and ambitious rulers. But the route from the sea to the highlands is not simple. Goods arriving at coastal ports must be loaded onto animals and carried inland across scorching lowlands before climbing toward cooler country. Caravans follow valleys, dry riverbeds, and establish tracks where wells and grazing are available. Every stage requires organization. Merchants need protection, animals need fodder, roads and stopping places must be maintained. Taxes must be collected without destroying the trade that produces them. The kingdom that masters these connections can transform geography into political authority. Aksum rises near a meeting point of these routes. The city itself stands inland, surrounded by cultivable land and positioned close enough to the coast to benefit from maritime trade, without depending entirely on coastal survival. Rainfall in the region is greater than in many surrounding lowlands, and the volcanic soils can be fertile. Nearby routes lead west toward the Nile basin, south into the Ethiopian interior, north toward the lands of modern Eritrea, and east toward the sea. This is not an accidental location. It is a place where grain, livestock, labour, tribute, and imported luxury goods can be gathered under royal control. The people living here leave behind traces, but not a complete account of themselves. Stone foundations reveal substantial buildings. Pottery fragments suggest changing habits and widening connections. Inscriptions preserve royal names and religious language, though many ordinary lives remain almost invisible. Farmers, porters, herders, craftspeople, soldiers, and merchants create the material base of the kingdom. Yet the record favours kings. The evidence remains incomplete, and much of early Aksum must be reconstructed from scattered clues rather than continuous chronicles. Even so, the outline of transformation is visible. Small centres become larger settlements. Local rulers gain control over surrounding communities. Monumental architecture begins to appear. Trade expands. Authority becomes concentrated. A society rooted in difficult highlands learns to direct the movement of goods between Africa, Arabia, and the wider Indian Ocean. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. From the plateau, the world looks vast but reachable. To the west lies the Nile, to the east lies the sea, to the north stand the powers of Egypt and the Mediterranean. Across the water, Arabian kingdoms compete for incense routes and ports. Aksum has not yet become an empire, but the conditions are gathering around it. The rains feed its fields. The mountains protect its heartland. The caravans bring wealth through its territory. And somewhere among these highland settlements, rulers are beginning to understand that control of the road can become control of a kingdom. Long before Aksum's kings command armies or strike coins in gold, the highlands are already home to communities capable of building in stone, organising labour, and maintaining connections across the Red Sea. Their world is not yet imperial, but it is far from simple. Villages cluster near reliable water and cultivable soil, while larger centres rise at places where farming, ritual, and exchange come together. Among them, one settlement will later become especially important to the story of Aksum's origins, Yeha, a site of massive stone walls, monumental architecture, and inscriptions that seem at first to speak with an Arabian voice. At Yeha stands a temple built from enormous, carefully fitted blocks. Its walls rise without mortar, the stones cut and placed with such precision that the structure survives long after roofs, doors, and ceremonies have vanished. The building is usually associated with Almaka, a lunar deity worshipped in the South Arabian kingdom of Saba. Inscriptions written in a South Arabian script appear in the region, and architectural forms resemble those found across the Red Sea. For early scholars, the conclusion seemed obvious. Migrants from Arabia must have crossed into Africa, established colonies, and brought advanced political organization with them. That interpretation suited an older habit of viewing major African civilizations as products of outside intervention. Monumental buildings, writing, and centralized rule were treated as suspicious when they appeared south of Egypt. Foreign builders were imagined wherever local achievement seemed too impressive to fit inherited prejudice. Aksum, in this version of history, became the descendant of Arabian colonists who carried civilization into a supposedly undeveloped land. Archaeology has steadily weakened that simple picture. The South Arabian connection remains undeniable, but the evidence does not show an empty highland suddenly occupied by a superior foreign population. Indigenous communities were already present, and their material traditions continue through the period of strongest Arabian influence. Local pottery does not disappear. Agricultural practices remain rooted in the African highlands. The language that later dominates Aksum Jez belongs to the Ethiopian Semitic branch, but language alone cannot prove mass colonization, and scholars still debate the timing and nature of the movements that shaped it. What survives suggests contact, migration, adaptation, and intermarriage rather than a clean replacement of one population by another. The Red Sea encourages exactly this kind of entanglement. Its shores are close enough for repeated crossings, yet different enough to create opportunities for merchants, craftsmen, priests, and political exiles. A voyage between southern Arabia and the African coast can be dangerous, but it is hardly unimaginable. Seasonal winds and established sailing knowledge allow people to move back and forth with cargoes of incense, grain, livestock, metal, and ideas. Some travellers stay. Others return home. A temple plan copied from Arabia may be rebuilt with African labour, altered for a local ritual, and used by a community whose identity cannot be reduced to either shore. In the centuries before Aksum's rise, the northern highlands may have contained several competing chiefdoms or small kingdoms. Their names are only partly preserved, and their boundaries remain uncertain. One political formation is often called Deemt, known from inscriptions and archaeological remains dating broadly to the 1st millennium BCE. It appears to have possessed rulers, religious centres, and access to regional trade, but historians disagree over its scale. It may have been a substantial kingdom controlling wide territory, or a looser network centred on a few elite sites. No single explanation fully accounts for the uneven evidence. Deemt is important not because it can be confidently identified as Aksum in an earlier form, but because it reveals that complex political organisation already exists in the region, centuries before the Aksumite state becomes visible. Leaders mobilise workers to quarry and transport stone. Priests oversee temples. Specialists produce inscriptions and carved objects. Farmers generate enough surplus to support people who do not spend every day growing food. These are the quiet structures from which later kingdoms are built. Yet continuity is not straightforward. After the decline of the major pre-Aksumite centres, the archaeological record becomes less clear. Monumental construction changes. Some settlements contract or are abandoned. Political authority may fragment. The centuries separating Deemt from the first clearly Aksumite rulers are sometimes treated as a dark interval, but the darkness belongs mostly to the surviving evidence. People do not vanish from the highlands. Communities continue to farm, trade, and compete, even when they leave fewer royal inscriptions behind. This gap creates one of the central problems in understanding Aksum's formation. Was the empire the direct institutional heir of earlier highland kingdoms, or did it arise through a later political realignment? Did one dynasty gradually absorb neighbouring communities, or did new elites seize control of established trade routes? The evidence remains incomplete, and the answer may involve several processes unfolding at once. By the final centuries BCE and the opening centuries CE, settlements near Aksum begin to show growing wealth and organisation. Elite tombs appear, large buildings rise, imported ceramics and glass indicate contact with distant markets. Local craft production becomes more specialised. These changes suggest that power is concentrating again, this time around a centre positioned farther west than Yeha, and better connected to routes leading toward the African interior. The people driving this transformation inherit a mixed world. They know traditions associated with South Arabia, but they are rooted in African landscapes. They use writing derived from scripts across the sea, yet over time adapt it into forms that become distinctively local. They worship deities whose names reveal wide cultural connections, while maintaining political identities tied to highland communities, their cattle, crops, tools, and houses belong to an environment that no imported model can fully explain. Aksum therefore does not begin with a single founding moment. There is no surviving account of one conqueror arriving, one city being established, or one dynasty declaring the birth of an empire. Instead, the kingdom emerges gradually from older layers of settlement, ritual, trade, and competition. Its origins are visible only in fragments: a temple wall, a royal name, a burial chamber, a changed pottery style, a road leading toward the sea. By the time Aksum becomes recognizable as a state, it has already absorbed centuries of experimentation. Earlier rulers have learned how to command labor. Merchants have mapped the routes between coast and plateau. Farmers have shaped the land into a dependable source of grain. Religious centers have given authority a sacred language, and generations of contact across the Red Sea have taught local elites how to borrow from foreign worlds without becoming copies of them. The empire that later challenges Rome is not imported whole. It is assembled in the highlands, piece by piece, from African foundations and international connections. Its rise begins not with conquest, but with the patient accumulation of advantages that earlier societies have left behind. Aksum's ascent begins when geography becomes organization. The highlands have always stood near important routes, but a road alone does not create a kingdom. Someone must protect it, tax it, feed the caravans that travel along it, and persuade merchants that the journey is worth the danger. By the early centuries of the Common Era, the rulers centered at Aksum appear increasingly capable of doing exactly that. They are not simply living beside trade, they are learning to control its movement. From the city, routes stretch in several directions, eastward. Paths descend through steep escarpments toward the Red Sea coast. Westward, tracks reach toward the Nile basin and lands connected to the Kingdom of Kush. Southward, travelers move deeper into the Ethiopian highlands, where agricultural communities, cattle, ivory, and other resources can be drawn into wider exchange. Northward, routes lead through the Eritrean plateau and toward regions closer to Egypt. Aksum stands near the point where these different worlds can be linked. The journey from the coast is difficult enough to make control valuable. Caravans climb from hot, dry lowlands into cooler country, carrying cargo on camels, donkeys, and sometimes human backs. Water must be found at known stops. Animals must be rested. Loads have to be guarded from theft. The route passes through territories inhabited by communities whose cooperation cannot be assumed. A ruler able to guarantee passage gains more than tolls. He gains influence over merchants who depend on stability, and over local leaders who benefit from access to foreign goods. This is likely how Aksumite's power expands at first, not through one sudden wave of conquest, but through control of strategic corridors. A settlement that commands a road can collect tribute. A kingdom that commands several roads can redirect commerce toward its own markets. Wealth gathered from trade can support soldiers, builders, officials, and royal households. Those institutions can then secure more territory, creating a cycle in which trade strengthens the state and the state protects trade. The goods passing through Aksum's sphere are among the most desired in the ancient world. Ivory is especially important. Elephant tusks are valued for furniture, decorative panels, religious objects, knife handles, boxes, and luxury carvings. Much of this ivory comes from regions beyond the immediate Aksumite heartland, meaning the kingdom profits by controlling the networks through which it moves. Rhinoceros horn, tortoiseshell, hides, and exotic animals also travel toward coastal markets. Gold reaches the trade system from interior sources whose exact routes remain uncertain. Aromatic resins and incense move through overlapping African and Arabian networks. In exchange come objects that signal wealth and connection. Glass vessels from the Roman world, fine ceramics, metal goods, wine, textiles, beads, and manufactured luxuries arrive through the ports. Some are consumed by elites, others are redistributed to local allies, turning imported objects into political tools. A ruler who gives rare foreign glass or brightly coloured cloth to a subordinate is not merely offering a gift. He is demonstrating access to a world beyond the mountains. A lesser-known clue to this expanding network appears in imported pottery fragments found at inland sites. A broken amphora handle or shard of red-slipped ware may seem unimpressive beside a monument, but it can reveal the movement of wine, oil, or other goods over extraordinary distances. Such fragments show that Aksum's elites participate in commercial systems reaching into the Roman Mediterranean. The evidence does not mean Roman merchants personally fill every highland marketplace. Trade often passes through many intermediaries, yet each transfer links Aksum more tightly to the wider economy. The Red Sea itself is undergoing a commercial transformation. Sailors have long travelled along its coasts, but improved understanding of seasonal winds allows ships to move more confidently between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Greek and Roman merchants increasingly seek direct access to ports connected with Arabia, East Africa, and India. Aksum benefits because its coastal zone lies near the gateway between these maritime worlds. An ancient Greek language trading account known today as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea describes the Red Sea and Indian Ocean commerce of the 1st century CE. It mentions the port of Adulis and a ruler of the region sometimes identified with an early Aksumite king. The text is not a neutral survey. It reflects the interests and assumptions of merchants, and scholars still debate how precisely its political description should be interpreted. Even so, it offers a rare outside glimpse of a kingdom becoming visible to foreign traders. The ruler associated with the region is described as governing the lands inland from Adulis and understanding Greek. Whether this means personal fluency, the use of interpreters, or simply a court accustomed to international contact is uncertain. What matters is the image of authority. The Highland king is not portrayed as an isolated tribal leader. He belongs to the diplomatic and commercial world of the Red Sea. Aksum's position allows it to profit from several economic zones without depending completely on any single one. Its farmers sustain the inland population. Its armies and allied communities extend influence over routes leading toward the interior. Its connection to Adulis provides access to maritime trade. Its rulers can negotiate with merchants from the Roman world, Arabia, and perhaps India, while remaining protected in a highland capital far from naval attack. That distance from the coast is an advantage, but it also creates a challenge. Aksum must maintain reliable authority between the royal centre and the port. Goods can be stolen, diverted, or taxed by rivals along the way. Coastal elites may develop their own ambitions. Local communities controlling wells and passes can disrupt movement. The kingdom therefore needs more than soldiers. It needs agreements, officials, tribute relationships, and a reputation strong enough to discourage resistance. The exact form of Aksumite administration remains unclear. Few records survive describing tax collection or provincial government in detail. There may have been royal representatives, local rulers subordinate to the king, military commanders, and merchant communities with considerable autonomy. What survives in the records suggests flexibility rather than a rigid bureaucracy imposed uniformly across every territory. This flexibility may explain Aksum's early success. It does not need to occupy every village directly. It needs to dominate the routes, receive tribute, command loyalty from key leaders, and punish those who threaten commerce. Authority can be strongest near the capital and along major roads while becoming looser at the edges. Such an empire is less a solid block on a map than a network of controlled nodes. As wealth accumulates, the city of Aksum changes. Elite residences grow larger. Imported goods become more common. Royal burials become more elaborate. Craftspeople work for patrons able to command labour and materials on a scale unknown to earlier communities. Power is becoming visible in stone, metal, and ceremony. Yet the kingdom's most important achievement is still largely invisible. It has turned movement into authority. Every caravan climbing toward the plateau, every tusk carried eastward, every amphora brought inland, and every tribute payment strengthens a political centre that can now imagine ambitions beyond its original territory. Aksum stands at the crossroads, but it is no longer waiting for the world to pass by. It is beginning to decide where the roads lead, who may travel them, and what price must be paid for crossing an African kingdom that is rapidly becoming an empire. The road descending from Aksum toward the coast does not end at an anonymous beach. It ends at Adulis, the maritime gateway through which the kingdom touches the wider world. From the highland capital, The journey eastward crosses changing climates in a matter of days. Cool uplands give way to dry escarpments, thorn country, and coastal heat. Caravans arrive coated in dust, their animals strained from the descent, their loads marked by weeks or months of travel. Ahead lies the Red Sea, bright, salt-heavy and crowded with possibilities. Adulis stands somewhere along the Eritrean coast, near the modern Gulf of Zula, though the exact shape of the ancient harbour has changed with sediment, shoreline movement, and time. Archaeologists have identified ruins, pottery, building remains, and imported materials across the region, but the full extent of the city remains uncertain. What survives suggests a place much larger and more cosmopolitan than a simple landing point. Warehouses, workshops, markets, administrative spaces, and residential quarters likely gathered around the routes between sea and interior. Ships approaching Adulis must navigate reefs, shallows, and seasonal winds. Some hug the coast, stopping frequently for water and supplies. Others arrive after longer journeys from Egypt, Arabia, or the Indian Ocean. Their hulls carry wine in amphorae, glassware, metal objects, textiles, beads, and manufactured goods. When they leave, they take on ivory, tortoiseshell, hides, incense, gold, and living animals destined for royal courts or arenas far away. The port is a place where objects change hands, but also where information moves. Sailors bring news of wars, taxes, storms, rulers, and prices in distant markets. The language of Adulis must have reflected its traffic. Greek serves as an important commercial and diplomatic language across the eastern Mediterranean and Red Sea world. Local languages are spoken by port workers, officials, farmers, and caravan leaders. Arabian merchants bring their own dialects, while visitors from farther east arrive with unfamiliar speech. Interpreters become essential. A bargain may pass through several languages before a load is weighed and a price agreed. The port's daily life is shaped by labour. Dock workers unload heavy amphorae and timber, animal handlers calm frightened cargo, scribes record quantities and ownership, craftspeople repair ropes, sails, jars, and metal fittings. Food sellers supply sailors who may remain ashore while ships wait for favourable winds. Water, always precious, must be stored and distributed. The glamour of international trade depends on countless repetitive tasks performed by people whose names never enter royal inscriptions. Adulis also gives Aksum access to objects that transform elite life in the highlands. Imported glass appears in wealthy burials and residences. Fine ceramics signal participation in foreign tastes. Wine, probably consumed most often by elites and visiting merchants, arrives in transport jars whose fragments later become some of archaeology's most useful evidence. A single shard stamped or shaped in a recognizable style can connect the port to Egypt, the Levant, or the Mediterranean centuries after the merchant who handled it has vanished. One surprising detail is that Aksum's international trade is not only about luxury. Ordinary materials matter as well. Iron tools, copper alloys, cloth, salt, grain, and livestock can be just as important to sustaining a kingdom as gold or ivory. High-value goods attract attention because they travel far and appear in elite contexts. But the commercial system survives through mixed cargoes and practical exchange. A ship rarely depends on one precious commodity alone. The relationship between Adulis and the Highland court is central to Aksumite power. The king must secure the route, supervise customs, and prevent coastal rivals from capturing the profits. Yet the port cannot function through royal command alone. Merchants need predictable rules. Local communities must supply food, animals, and labour. Foreign traders require enough trust to return. The success of Adulis therefore rests on negotiation as much as coercion. Exactly how taxes are collected remains unclear. Officials may inspect cargoes, levy duties, or require gifts for the crown. Some transactions may be handled by merchant communities with their own customs. The evidence remains incomplete, and no surviving administrative archive explains the system in detail. Still, the wealth visible at Aksum strongly suggests that the monarchy captures a significant share of what passes through the port. Adulis is also a political stage. Foreign envoys can arrive there before travelling inland. Royal announcements can be displayed where merchants from many regions will see them. Ancient sources describe inscriptions set up at or near the port, recording campaigns and victories. One famous text, preserved only because a later writer copied it, recounts the conquests of an unnamed Aksumite ruler. The inscription presents the king as a warrior whose authority extends over peoples on both sides of the Red Sea. Scholars still debate its date and identity, but its location is meaningful. A message placed at Adulis is directed not only toward local subjects, but toward the international world. The port therefore does more than enrich Aksum. It makes Aksum visible. A ruler who controls Adulis can communicate with Roman Egypt, Arabian kingdoms, and Indian Ocean traders without leaving the highlands. Foreign merchants carry impressions of the kingdom to other ports. They report whether the roads are safe, whether officials are reliable, and whether the king is powerful enough to enforce his promises. Yet maritime trade remains vulnerable, storms wreck ships, reefs tear open hulls. Political conflict in Arabia can close routes. Piracy and local warfare can interrupt supply. Epidemics may travel with crews and cargo. Aksum's rulers cannot control the entire sea, but they can make their own gateway more attractive than competing ports. Security, storage, fair exchange, and access to inland products become strategic advantages. From Adulis, the empire looks different than it does from the capital. In Aksum, power is expressed through stone, ceremony, and royal distance. At the coast, power is measured in arriving sails, loaded caravans, full warehouses, and the confidence of merchants willing to return. The port is noisy, multilingual, and exposed to change. It is also the place where the ambitions of a highland kingdom become global. Every tusk carried down from the interior, every jar unloaded from Egypt, and every merchant who climbs toward the plateau binds Adulis and Aksum together. The city in the mountains provides authority and protection. The port provides movement and wealth. Between them runs the artery of an empire, and along that road, royal power begins to take a form the wider ancient world can no longer ignore. As wealth moves inland from Adulis, it does not remain scattered among merchants, caravan leaders, and local chiefs. Increasingly, it flows toward a royal centre capable of turning trade into monuments, soldiers, ceremonies, and obedience. This is the stage at which Aksum stops looking like one prosperous highland kingdom among several, and begins to acquire the structure of a regional power. Authority becomes more concentrated, royal display grows more ambitious, and the landscape around the capital is reshaped to make kingship visible. The city of Aksum spreads across a broad highland basin surrounded by cultivated fields and low ridges. It is not enclosed by the kind of massive defensive wall associated with many Mediterranean cities. Its strength lies instead in distance, terrain, and political control over the surrounding region. Within the urban area rise elite compounds built from stone and timber, often set on raised foundations. Their elevated platforms separate royal and aristocratic space from the ordinary ground around them, turning architecture into hierarchy. These buildings require coordinated labour. Stone must be quarried, cut, transported, and fitted. Timber must be brought from areas where suitable trees still grow. Food must support workers temporarily removed from farming. Craftspeople need tools, materials, and patrons. Monumental construction therefore reveals more than wealth. It reveals the ability of rulers to command time and human effort on a large scale. The same is true of Aksum's water systems. Seasonal rainfall makes storage essential during dry months. Reservoirs, ponds, wells, and channels help sustain the urban population and nearby agriculture. One great basin at Aksum, later known as the Queen of Sheba's Bath, may have served as a reservoir, though its precise history remains debated. A growing capital cannot depend on rain falling at exactly the right moment. Royal power also extends beyond construction. Aksumite rulers must manage a political world made up of different peoples, landscapes, and local authorities. Direct administration over every settlement would be difficult, especially across mountains and semi-arid lowlands. The kingdom likely relies on a layered system. Some territories are governed closely from the centre. Others remain under local rulers who acknowledge Aksumite supremacy, send tribute, provide troops, or protect roads. Military campaigns reinforce these relationships when negotiation fails. This produces an empire with uneven boundaries. Aksumite authority is strongest around the capital, major agricultural zones, and routes to Adulis. Farther away, Control may depend on seasonal tribute or the loyalty of subordinate chiefs. Maps drawn with sharp modern borders can therefore be misleading. The empire is better imagined as a web of strong points, roads, allied communities, and zones of influence that expand or contract with the strength of each king. Royal titles reflect this ambition. Aksumite monarchs present themselves not merely as rulers of one city, but as kings over multiple lands and peoples. Their inscriptions list defeated groups, conquered territories, and tribute-bearing regions. Such claims must be treated carefully. Ancient rulers rarely describe setbacks, and a campaign into a territory does not always prove lasting control. Still, repeated military activity suggests that expansion is central to the monarchy's identity. The army supporting this expansion is difficult to reconstruct in detail. It probably includes a royal corps, levies from subject communities, and forces supplied by allied leaders. Infantry would be practical across rugged highland terrain. Though mounted troops may have served important roles, spears, shields, bows, and swords appear in regional traditions. But the evidence remains incomplete. Royal inscriptions emphasize victory, not logistics. Logistics, however, determine whether victories endure. Soldiers must be fed, roads secured, and tribute transported. Aksum's agricultural base gives the monarchy resources that a purely trading state would lack. Grain from the highlands sustains the capital and supports campaigns. Cattle provide meat, hides, status, and mobile wealth. Control over productive land allows rulers to reward followers even when maritime trade is disrupted. One lesser-known feature of Aksumite construction is the distinctive use of timber framing within stone walls. Beams are laid horizontally at intervals, strengthening structures and creating projecting ends later echoed in Ethiopian architectural traditions. On monumental facades, this technique becomes decorative as well as practical. Buildings proclaim a local style rooted in materials and methods developed for the highland environment. Aksum borrows from abroad. But its architecture is not a copy of Rome, Egypt, or Arabia. At the center of this political order stands the king, surrounded by ritual. Early Aksumite rulers are associated with pre-Christian deities, and military success is presented as proof of divine favor. Subjects encounter the monarchy through officials, taxes, ceremonies, gifts, punishments, building projects, and stories of royal victories carried along the roads. The court also attracts people with specialized knowledge. Scribes compose inscriptions in Gaze and Greek. Metalworkers produce weapons, ornaments, and eventually coins. Stonecutters carve monumental markers. Merchants advise on foreign exchange and distant markets. Priests give religious authority to royal decisions. The concentration of these skills strengthens the capital, while making surrounding communities increasingly dependent on it. Yet the monarchy's power should not be imagined as absolute. Bad harvest can weaken its ability to reward followers. Local leaders can rebel. Caravans can choose alternative routes. A failed campaign may expose royal vulnerability. Scholars still debate how centralized Aksum truly becomes, because the surviving evidence is dominated by the voice of kings. Ordinary resistance, negotiation, and compromise rarely leave inscriptions of their own. What can be seen is the result. By the 3rd century, Aksum possesses enough wealth and confidence to enter the political vocabulary of the wider ancient world. A later writer will count it among the great powers of the age, alongside Rome, Persia, and other major kingdoms. Such recognition does not arise from trade alone. It comes from the successful conversion of commerce into institutions. Aksum's rulers have learned to gather tribute without strangling exchange, to command labour without emptying the fields, and to expand through a mixture of force and alliance. The city's raised palaces, reservoirs, roads, and elite tombs all express the same achievement. A highland centre has become the organising heart of a territory stretching toward coast, desert, and distant frontier. The next step is more daring. Royal power will no longer be displayed only in buildings and victories. It will be compressed into small pieces of metal, stamped with the king's face, carried by strangers, and exchanged across seas. Aksum is about to make its authority portable. The decision to mint coins changes the way Aksum speaks to the world. Until this moment, royal authority is fixed in places in palaces raised above the ground, in carved inscriptions, in towering stone monuments, and in armies moving beneath the king's command. Coinage allows that authority to travel. A small disc of gold or silver can pass from a royal treasury into a merchant's hand, cross the Red Sea, enter a market in Arabia or Egypt, and continue onward long after the ruler whose face it bears has died. Power becomes portable, measurable, and difficult to ignore. Aksum begins minting coins around the late 3rd century CE, becoming the first major state in sub-Saharan Africa known to issue its own independent coinage in gold, silver, and bronze. This is not a minor technical innovation. Gold coinage in particular belongs to the language of great powers. Rome mints gold to pay armies, reward officials, and sustain long-distance commerce. Persia does the same within its own political world. When Aksumite kings place their portraits on gold coins, they are not merely making trade more convenient, they are announcing that their kingdom possesses the resources, craftsmanship, and confidence of an empire. The earliest known Aksumite coins are associated with King Indubis. On them, the ruler appears in profile or frontal form, wearing a headcloth or crown, surrounded by inscriptions in Greek. The choice of Greek is deliberate. Greek remains widely understood among merchants and elites across the Eastern Mediterranean and Red Sea trade networks. A coin intended to circulate beyond the highlands must communicate with people who may never hear Ge'ez spoken, by using Greek. Aksum addresses the international marketplace in a language that foreign traders recognize. Yet the coins are not imitations of Roman money. They borrow elements of Mediterranean royal portraiture, but their designs quickly develop a distinct character. The king's clothing, headgear, symbols, and titles reflect Aksumite traditions. On some early issues, stalks of grain frame the royal portrait, perhaps representing fertility, abundance, or the agricultural base of the kingdom. The image carries a quiet message: the king's wealth does not rest only on imported luxuries. It rises from fields, harvests, and the productive highlands behind the coast. The gold itself likely comes from trade networks reaching into the African interior, though the exact sources remain uncertain. Aksum controls routes through which precious metal can move toward the Red Sea, and its rulers possess enough gold to maintain a recognizable currency over generations. The ability to produce coins of consistent weight and purity requires specialized knowledge. Metal must be refined, measured, heated, divided into blanks, and struck between engraved dies. Mistakes are costly. A badly debased or irregular currency can damage confidence among merchants who judge value by both weight and reputation. Aksumite money therefore depends on trust. A merchant accepting a gold coin may not know the king personally, but he recognizes the royal image and expects the metal to meet an accepted standard. That expectation turns the monarchy into a guarantor of exchange. The coin declares that the ruler stands behind its value, even when it travels far beyond his direct control. Gold coins likely serve high-value transactions, diplomatic payments, military expenses, and international trade. Silver and bronze circulate more widely in regional markets, though scholars still debate exactly how deeply coinage penetrates ordinary economic life. Many rural exchanges probably continue through barter, obligations, grain payments, livestock, or weighed metal. Coins do not suddenly replace every older system. Instead, they add another layer to an economy that remains varied. Their archaeological distribution provides a map of Aksum's connections. Coins have been found in Ethiopia, Eritrea, southern Arabia, and places linked to wider Red Sea commerce. Their presence does not always prove direct political control, because money travels through trade, tribute, gifts, and personal movement. Still, each discovery marks a route along which Aksumite authority or commerce has passed. The imagery on the coins becomes especially important because it records political and religious change almost as it happens. Early kings appear with symbols connected to the pre-Christian religious world, including the disk and crescent. These emblems may be associated with celestial deities worshipped in the region and across parts of southern Arabia. They place the king beneath divine protection and present royal authority as part of a sacred order older than the empire itself. Later, under King Azana, the imagery changes. The disk and crescent disappear, replaced by the Christian cross. This transformation is one of the clearest surviving signs of Aksum's conversion. A written inscription can remain hidden on a monument or restricted to those able to read it. A coin reaches markets, soldiers, tax collectors, merchants, and households. By changing the symbol on currency, the monarchy broadcasts a new religious identity across the kingdom and beyond. The shift is striking because the royal portrait often remains. The king is still the centre of the design, but the divine framework around him has changed. Christianity does not erase Aksumite kingship, it is absorbed into it. The cross becomes a sign not only of belief, but of state authority, diplomatic alignment, and legitimacy. Coin inscriptions also reveal how Aksum's rulers wished to be understood. Greek legends present royal names and titles to foreign audiences. Ge'ez appears on later issues, showing the growing importance of the kingdom's own written language. Some coins carry short religious phrases, including appeals for peace or favour. Because space is limited, every word matters. A coin is a compressed royal proclamation. One surprising detail is the attention given to gilding on certain silver and bronze coins. Selected parts of the design, such as the king's crown or the cross, may be covered with a thin layer of gold. The effect creates visual emphasis without requiring the entire coin to be made from precious metal. Even relatively modest currency can therefore participate in royal spectacle. A flash of gold draws the eye toward the symbol the monarchy once remembered. The coins also help modern scholars reconstruct Aksum's royal sequence. Many kings are known primarily or partly through their currency. Names, portraits, symbols, and changes in style provide clues to chronology where written histories are missing, yet the evidence remains incomplete. Some rulers may have issued no coins, and others are known from only a handful of surviving examples. Coin types can be difficult to date precisely, and the relationship between different kings is not always clear. Even with these uncertainties, Aksumite coinage reveals an extraordinary confidence. The kingdom does not hide behind the currencies of Rome or Arabia, it creates its own. Its rulers place African royal faces on gold, use international languages without surrendering local identity, and allow their symbols to travel through the commercial arteries of the ancient world. A coin can fit beneath a tongue, disappear into a purse, or lie forgotten beneath a market floor for centuries, yet each one carries a claim larger than itself. It says that Aksum has gold worth weighing, laws worth trusting, kings worth recognizing, and an empire strong enough to stamp its name onto metal. The crown no longer remains in the Highland Palace. It travels wherever trade can carry it. Long before Aksum's coins are buried beneath distant market floors, its kings attempt to defeat forgetting in a more difficult medium. They raise stone. Across the northern edge of the capital, enormous pillars rise above burial grounds, some plain and severe, others carved to resemble the facades of buildings that never existed. Doors are cut into solid rock, rows of false windows climb toward the sky, beams, frames, and projecting timber ends are imitated in stone with such precision that the monuments appear like narrow palaces stretched upward. They are not temples and not ordinary memorials, they are markers for the dead, announcements that the rulers beneath them possessed enough power to move mountains in pieces. These monuments are usually called stelae or obelisks, though the term obelisk can be misleading because their form differs from the smooth, tapering monuments of ancient Egypt. Aksum's finest examples are architectural sculptures. Their carved surfaces reproduce the distinctive style of elite Aksumite buildings, including alternating stone and timber construction, recessed windows, and symbolic doors. The effect is both familiar and impossible. A palace becomes a single upright slab, stripped of interior space but retaining the outward signs of rank. The largest surviving upright monument, commonly known as the Obelisk of Aksum, rises more than 20 meters. Another, often called the Great Stele, was even larger, probably approaching 33 meters in height and weighing several hundred tons. It now lies broken on the ground, its carved stories shattered across the burial field. Even in collapse, it dominates the site. Standing beside it, one can see window after window running along its length, each level representing a floor in a stone tower that was never meant to be entered. The creation of such monuments begins in nearby quarries, where workers separate vast blocks from living rock. The exact methods are not fully known. Stonecutters may use iron tools, wooden wedges, water, and patient labour to exploit natural fractures. Once a block is freed, its surfaces must be shaped and carved without causing a fatal crack. The more elaborate stelae are likely decorated before being raised, because carving their upper sections after erection would have been nearly impossible. Transport presents an even greater challenge. A stone weighing hundreds of tons cannot be carried by animals in any ordinary sense. It must be dragged over prepared ground using ropes, timber rollers, sledges, ramps, and large teams of workers. Paths may need to be levelled and reinforced. Every slope becomes dangerous. Every uneven movement risks splitting the monument or crushing the people guiding it. No surviving Aksumite text explains the procedure. So reconstructions depend on engineering estimates and comparison with other ancient societies. Scholars still debate how many workers were required and exactly how the stones were lifted. Raising a stelae probably demands an earth ramp, a deep foundation pit, thick ropes, timber frameworks, and carefully coordinated force. The base is guided downward while the upper end is pulled gradually upright. Once vertical, the foundation is packed and secured. A small miscalculation could destroy years of labour in moments. The successful erection of several giant stelae demonstrates not only technical skill, but a monarchy able to gather, feed, and command a workforce on an extraordinary scale. The monuments stand above underground tombs and burial chambers associated with Aksum's elite. Some graves consist of stone-lined pits, while the most elaborate include multiple rooms, corridors, stairways, and carefully fitted masonry. Archaeologists have given modern names to structures such as the Tomb of the False Door and the Tomb of the Brick Arches, but the people originally buried within them remain unknown. Royal names were not preserved beside the monuments in a form that can now be read. Aksum's greatest memorial landscape is therefore filled with kings whose identities have disappeared. This absence creates a strange contrast. The rulers build on a scale intended to make memory permanent, yet the monuments survive more clearly than the people they commemorate. There are no secure inscriptions naming the occupant beneath the tallest standing stelae. Grave robbers disturbed many chambers in antiquity, removing precious objects and scattering remains. Later building, erosion, and collapse further damaged the site. What survives in the record suggests rich funerary ceremonies, but their details must be inferred from architecture, fragments, and comparisons with other burials. The dead may have been placed with jewellery, vessels, imported goods, weapons, and objects expressing rank. Feasting could have accompanied burial, linking the royal household, officials, soldiers, priests, and subject leaders in a public display of continuity. The stelae above the tomb turns private death into political theatre. A king dies, but the institution of kingship remains standing. The false doors carved near the base of some monuments may have carried symbolic meaning. They resemble the entrances of elite buildings but lead nowhere. Perhaps they represent passage into the world of the dead, the eternal residence of the deceased, or simply the royal facade translated into funerary form. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every design. What is clear is that the monument transforms architecture into identity. The dead ruler is represented by the kind of structure he commanded in life. The great stele reveals the danger hidden inside this ambition. It appears to have fallen during or soon after its erection. Its broken position suggests that the foundation failed, the stone tilted, and the enormous shaft crashed across nearby structures. The impact damaged parts of the burial complex beneath it. Whether the disaster occurred because of unstable ground, insufficient foundation depth, a flaw in the stone, or an error during lifting remains uncertain. Its fall must have been terrifying. Hundreds of tons of carved rock would have gathered speed slowly and then struck with enough force to shake the earth around it. Workers may have been killed, though no evidence confirms casualties. The collapse would have been more than an engineering failure. It was a public wound to royal authority, a monument intended to proclaim permanence destroyed before it could properly stand. After this period, the construction of giant carved stelae appears to decline. Christianity later changes Aksum's funerary landscape, and royal energy moves toward churches, crosses, inscriptions, and different forms of remembrance. The fallen monument may not have caused that transformation, but it becomes an accidental symbol of an older world nearing its end. Around the burial field, the surviving stones still form a silent population. Some rise straight against the sky, others lean. Many remain rough and undecorated, marking people of lesser rank or graves now lost. Together they reveal a society obsessed with the relationship between political power, architecture, and death. Aksum's kings could send their faces across the sea on gold coins. But here they attempted something heavier. They tried to anchor memory in the earth itself. Their names faded, their tombs were opened, their greatest monument fell. Yet the stones remained, carrying the shape of vanished palaces and the weight of a royal world that refused to disappear quietly. The monuments of Aksum rise from a world of kings whose names are often lost. But by the 4th century, one ruler steps out of that silence with unusual clarity. His name is Ezana, and through coins, inscriptions, military records, and religious change, he becomes the most visible monarch in Aksumite history. He does not create the empire from nothing. The trade routes, royal institutions, agricultural wealth, and monumental traditions are already in place. What Ezana does is gather these foundations into a more aggressive and self-conscious form of kingship, one that claims authority across mountains, deserts, river valleys, and the Red Sea itself. Ezana probably comes to the throne while still young. Later tradition associates his early reign with the influence of foreign Christians at court, but the chronology is uncertain, and the surviving evidence does not provide a simple biography. His first coins continue the symbols of Aksum's older religion. The disc and crescent remain above the royal portrait, and inscriptions invoke deities who had long protected the monarchy. Ezana initially rules within the sacred framework inherited from earlier kings. His authority, however, is presented in increasingly expansive terms. Royal inscriptions give him titles over Aksum, Himyar, Saba, and other peoples or territories on both sides of the Red Sea. These claims should not be read as precise maps of permanent occupation. Ancient kings frequently turned raids, tribute relationships, and temporary victories into declarations of universal rule. Yet Ezana's titles are not empty decoration. They reveal the scale of Aksumite ambition and the geographic world in which the monarchy expects to act. Campaigns become central to this image. Ezana's inscriptions describe wars against groups who resist tribute, attack caravans, threaten borders, or challenge royal authority. His armies march through difficult landscapes where the environment can be as dangerous as the enemy. Highland troops descend into hotter lowlands, cross river systems, and move through territories where food and water must be secured before battle is even possible. The king repeatedly emphasizes that punishment is directed against rebellion, not simply carried out for destruction. This is royal justification, and it comes from the victor's voice, but it shows how Aksum presents expansion as the restoration of order. One campaign is directed against the Beja, pastoral peoples living across parts of the eastern desert and Red Sea hills. Control over these regions matters because they stand near routes linking the highlands, coast, Nile Valley, and Egypt. The Beja are not one unified nation waiting to be conquered. They consist of mobile communities and shifting alliances adapted to harsh terrain. Aksumite forces may win battles and take captives, but controlling such populations permanently is far more difficult than defeating them once. Ezana records that conquered groups are resettled, supplied with food, and placed under royal authority. The description combines violence and paternalism in a familiar imperial pattern. People are uprooted, then the king presents himself as their protector. Whether these relocations happened exactly as described remains uncertain, but forced settlement would have served several purposes. It could weaken hostile communities, provide labour, populate strategic areas, and turn defeated enemies into taxpayers or soldiers. Another conflict involves peoples identified in inscriptions as the Noba and other groups west or northwest of the Aksumite heartland. These campaigns bring Ezana closer to the political world of the Nile. The Kingdom of Kush, centered farther north along the river, has long controlled trade, agriculture, and power between central Sudan and Egypt. By Ezana's reign, Kush is weakening, though the causes remain debated. Aksum's movement into this region is therefore not an attack on a stable frontier. It occurs amid changing alliances, local conflicts, and declining royal authority. Ezana's inscriptions are written in more than one language and script, including Greek and forms of Ge'ez. This multilingual presentation reflects different audiences. Greek announces royal achievements to the international world. Ge'ez addresses the kingdom's own political and religious sphere. Some inscriptions appear in both vocalized and unvocalized forms of the local script, revealing a writing tradition in transition. Language itself becomes part of imperial display. The content of these texts also changes during Ezana's reign. Early inscriptions invoke Marum, a war god closely associated with the king, and sometimes compared by Greek-speaking audiences to Ares. Victory is granted by the traditional gods, and royal power rests beneath their protection. Later inscriptions instead invoke the Lord of Heaven, the Lord of Earth, and the Christian God. The change is not subtle. Ezana's public identity has been transformed. This conversion does not prevent warfare. Christian inscriptions still describe campaigns, enemies, tribute, and punishment. The new faith changes the divine explanation of victory, not the basic demands of empire. Ezana now claims that the Christian God grants success to his armies. The cross replaces the disc and crescent on his coins, and the monarchy aligns itself with a religion already gaining strength across the Roman world. One lesser-known feature of Ezana's inscriptions is the attention given to mercy after conquest. The king sometimes claims that he spared populations, provided food, or avoided harming certain groups. Such statements may partly be propaganda, designed to present him as a righteous ruler rather than a mere raider, yet their presence is significant. Aksumite kingship is developing a moral vocabulary in which victory must be justified before both divine authority and human audiences. Ezana's capital benefits from these campaigns. Tribute arrives in livestock, precious materials, captives, and regional products. Military success reinforces loyalty among nobles and commanders. Coins spread the royal portrait. Inscriptions preserve the official version of events. The king's authority becomes visible in several media at once, each supporting the others. Still, there are limits to what can be known. No continuous court chronicle survives. The names of Ezana's generals, advisors, rivals, and family members are mostly lost. His inscriptions tell what he once remembered, while defeats and compromises disappear. Scholars still debate the exact order of his campaigns and the territories he controlled directly. A claim to rule a people may mean conquest, tribute, alliance, or little more than temporary submission. What survives nevertheless reveals a monarchy operating far beyond the immediate surroundings of Aksum. Ezana sends armies toward deserts, lowlands, and the Nile. He communicates in international languages. He changes the religious identity of the crown. He uses coins and stone inscriptions to make distant victories part of a single imperial story. Under Ezana, Aksum no longer appears merely as a wealthy kingdom protected by mountains. It becomes an active power prepared to intervene wherever trade routes, tribute, faith, or royal prestige are at stake. Its armies now approach the ruins of another ancient civilization, and there the record becomes darker. Along the Nile, the Kingdom of Kush is nearing its end, and Aksum will soon be accused of delivering the final blow. Beyond Aksum's western approaches, the Nile carries the remains of a much older political world. For centuries, the Kingdom of Kush has ruled from centres such as Napata and Meroe, controlling river valleys, desert routes, agricultural land, gold-producing regions, and connections between Inner Africa and Egypt. Its kings once challenged pharaohs, governed Egypt as the 25th dynasty, built pyramids, and developed a written script that still resists complete decipherment. By the 4th century, however, this ancient kingdom is weakening, and Ezana's armies enter a landscape where imperial authority has already begun to fracture. The surviving Aksumite account describes conflict with peoples called the Noba, who are said to have attacked groups under Aksumite protection and caused disorder along the frontier. Ezana presents his campaign as a response to aggression. His forces cross rivers, seize settlements, destroy supplies, capture livestock, and pursue opponents through regions associated with the fading Kushite state. The inscription speaks with the certainty of victory, but behind its formal claims lies a much more complicated political collapse. Meroe, the Kushite capital, stands between the Nile and the Atbara River in what is now Sudan. Its rulers have long benefited from agriculture, ironworking, gold, animal products, and trade passing between the African interior, Red Sea, and Mediterranean north. The city contains temples, palaces, workshops, reservoirs, and royal cemeteries filled with steep-sided pyramids. To outsiders, it can appear isolated within desert country. Yet it belongs to a network of river settlements and caravan routes extending across northeastern Africa. That network is under growing pressure before Ezana arrives. Roman power in Egypt changes the political economy of the northern Nile. Trade routes shift. Desert peoples become more active. Regional rulers may gain independence from the central court. Environmental stress and changes in agricultural production may also contribute, though the evidence remains incomplete. Ironworking has sometimes been blamed for deforestation around Meroe, but this explanation is difficult to prove and may exaggerate the environmental impact of the furnaces. No single explanation fully accounts for Kush's decline. The movement of the Noba creates another layer of instability. These groups, probably related to populations later associated with Nubia, expand into territories once governed by Kush. They are not simply invaders arriving from nowhere. Some may already live within or beside the kingdom, serving as soldiers, pastoralists, allies, or rivals. As central authority weakens, their political importance grows. Ezana's inscriptions distinguish among groups in ways that are difficult to match precisely with archaeological evidence, and scholars still debate who these names describe. Aksum's interest in the region is practical as well as imperial. Routes westward offer access to gold, livestock, ivory, and connections toward the Nile. Disorder threatens merchants and communities linked to the Highland Kingdom. A successful campaign allows Ezana to punish enemies, display power, and perhaps redirect commerce toward Aksumite-controlled routes. It also places his monarchy in direct contact with the remains of one of Africa's most prestigious ancient states. The inscription recording the campaign was found at Aksum rather than in the conquered territory. Its purpose is therefore not merely administrative. It brings the frontier back to the capital, turning distant violence into evidence of royal greatness. Ezana describes towns burned, grain destroyed, captives taken, and enemies pursued. Such details reveal the harsh mechanics of ancient warfare. Armies do not defeat states only by winning battles. They attack food stores, animals, wells, settlements, and the ability of communities to recover. For ordinary people living along the Nile and its tributaries, the distinction between Aksumite soldier, Noba raider, Kushite official, and local rival may have mattered less than the immediate danger. Fields could be trampled or burned. Livestock could disappear in a single day. Families might flee across the river or hide in desert valleys. Royal inscriptions present movement across territory as a clean sequence of victories, but conquest is experienced at ground level as hunger, separation, and uncertainty. Ezana claims to have reached places associated with the heart of Kushite territory. This has encouraged the popular conclusion that Aksum destroyed Meroe and ended the Kingdom of Kush. The image is dramatic. A rising African empire descends from the highlands and delivers the final blow to an older Nile civilization. It creates a neat transfer of power from one great kingdom to another. The evidence does not support such certainty. Archaeology suggests that Meroe's decline unfolds gradually, rather than through one clearly identifiable destruction event. Some settlements continue after the central monarchy weakens. Kushite cultural traditions do not vanish immediately, and new regional states later emerge from the transformed political landscape. Ezana's campaign may have devastated parts of the kingdom, accelerated fragmentation, or exploited a collapse already underway. It may also have targeted groups occupying former Kushite territory, rather than the Kushite royal state itself. The absence of a matching Kushite account makes the problem harder. Meroitic writing can be sounded out, but much of its vocabulary remains poorly understood, limiting what surviving inscriptions can reveal. Aksum's version therefore dominates because it is readable, not necessarily because it is complete. What survives in the record suggests an important invasion, but not enough to declare Ezana the sole destroyer of Kush. Even the chronology is debated. The campaign probably occurs during the middle decades of the 4th century, but precise dates depend on interpretations of inscriptions, coin sequences, and regional archaeology. By then, Meroe may already have lost much of its authority. Ezana's army enters not a unified empire at its peak, but a contested zone where old institutions are breaking apart. This does not make the campaign insignificant. Aksum demonstrates that it can project military force far beyond the highland heartland. Its king claims authority over peoples connected to the Nile, one of the great geographic corridors of antiquity. The victory strengthens the image of Ezana as a ruler whose power reaches from the Red Sea toward the African interior. Yet the encounter also reveals how empires truly end. They rarely disappear in one night. A capital weakens, trade changes direction, regional leaders stop obeying, outsiders enter disputed territory, and familiar names gradually lose their meaning. By the time a victorious king claims to have destroyed the enemy, much of the old world may already have dissolved. Kush leaves behind pyramids, temples, undeciphered texts, and communities that carry fragments of its culture into later Nubian kingdoms. Aksum does not replace it completely, nor does it hold the entire Nile region permanently. Ezana's campaign is better understood as one violent moment within a longer transformation. The king returns to the highlands, able to present himself as conqueror of an ancient realm. But the greatest change of his reign is not taking place along the Nile. It is unfolding within Aksum itself, where the gods once invoked for victory are beginning to disappear from royal inscriptions, and a new symbol is preparing to claim the empire. The new symbol appears first in a form small enough to fit between two fingers, on coins issued during Ezana's reign. The old disc and crescent vanish, and the Christian cross takes their place. The change is easy to overlook when viewed as a technical detail of numismatics, but in the 4th century it carries the force of a public revolution. Every merchant who weighs the coin, every soldier who receives it, and every official who pays tribute with it encounters the altered sacred identity of the crown. The king still appears at the centre, the monarchy remains intact. What has changed is the power above it. Aksum's conversion to Christianity is traditionally connected to a man named Frumentius. His story survives through later Christian writers, especially the historian Rufinus, who presents an account based partly on information from Frumentius's associate. According to this tradition, Frumentius and another young man, Odysseus, are travelling on a Red Sea vessel when the ship stops along the African coast. Violence breaks out, the crew is killed, and the two youths are taken to the Aksumite court. There they gain the confidence of the king and eventually become involved in the education or administration of the royal household. The story has the shape of Providence shipwreck, captivity, service, and conversion leading to the foundation of a Christian kingdom. Its broad outline may preserve genuine events, though the details cannot be independently confirmed. Later religious traditions often organize complicated historical change around the actions of a single holy figure. Aksum's adoption of Christianity, however, probably emerges from a much wider field of contact. Christian merchants, sailors, captives, and migrants are already moving through the Red Sea world before Ezana's conversion. Egypt has become one of the most important centers of early Christianity, and communities of believers exist along trade routes connected to Roman ports. Arabia contains competing Jewish, Christian, and traditional religious groups. Adulis receives travelers from all of these regions. It would be surprising if Christian ideas had not reached Aksum before the royal court formally embraced them. Frumentius's importance lies in turning scattered presence into organized authority. Tradition says that after leaving Aksum he travels to Alexandria, where Athanasius, the powerful bishop of the Egyptian church, consecrates him as bishop and sends him back. Frumentius becomes known in Ethiopian tradition as Abba Salama, the father of peace. Through him, the Aksumite church forms a lasting connection with the Christian hierarchy of Alexandria. This link has consequences that continue for centuries. Ethiopian Christianity develops its own language, rituals, art, music, architecture, and traditions. Yet its senior bishop is long appointed through the Egyptian church. Aksum enters Christianity not as a remote imitation of Rome, but through the religious world of Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean. The faith that reaches the highlands is already diverse, politically charged, and shaped by disputes over doctrine. Ezana's conversion probably occurs around the middle of the 4th century, but no surviving document records the precise moment. Coins provide one of the clearest sequences. Early issues retain traditional symbols, later ones display the cross. Inscriptions also shift from invocations of Marem and other older deities toward language honoring the Christian god. The king's military victories are no longer attributed to a regional war god. They are granted by the Lord of Heaven. The transformation is significant, but it should not be imagined as the instant conversion of an entire population. A royal court can change its public religion far more quickly than villages, households, and local shrines. Priests of older cults do not necessarily disappear when the king adopts a new faith. Sacred places may continue to be used. Families may combine Christian practices with inherited rituals for generations. Scholars still debate how rapidly Christianity spread beyond the capital and major political centers. For the monarchy, the new religion offers several advantages. Christianity provides a universal language of kingship that can connect Aksum with the Roman and Byzantine worlds. It gives the crown access to literate clergy, sacred texts, and an international network of bishops and merchants. The king can present himself as chosen by one supreme god whose authority extends beyond any single mountain, river, or tribe. A faith without geographic limits suits an empire with expanding ambitions. Yet the conversion is not merely diplomatic calculation. Political benefit and genuine belief are not opposites. Ezana may sincerely embrace Christianity while also recognizing its usefulness. Ancient rulers rarely separate personal faith from public authority in the modern sense. A victorious king proves divine favor. A new religion reshapes not only private worship, but law, legitimacy, war, memory, and the meaning of the state. The adoption of the cross also alters Aksum's relationship with its earlier monuments. The giant stelae belong to a funerary system associated with pre-Christian kingship. Under Christianity, royal energy increasingly turns toward churches, crosses, saints, and new forms of burial. The transition is gradual, and older architectural habits do not vanish. Early Aksumite churches likely retain the raised platforms, timber-framed masonry, and monumental scale familiar from elite buildings. The new faith occupies a recognizably Aksumite physical world. One of the most important churches later associated with the kingdom is Mariam Zion, or St. Mary of Zion, at Aksum. Tradition places its origins in the Aksumite period, though repeated destruction, rebuilding, and religious memory make the earlier structure difficult to reconstruct. It becomes central to Ethiopian sacred history and royal legitimacy. Later rulers are crowned beneath its spiritual authority, linking medieval and early modern Ethiopia back to the ancient capital. Christianity also encourages the growth of written culture. Ge'ez becomes a language of scripture and worship. Biblical texts are translated, though the exact dates and stages of translation remain debated. The script, already used for royal inscriptions, becomes capable of carrying a much larger body of religious thought. Stories from the ancient Near East enter the highlands and are gradually woven into local memory. This process produces one of Aksum's most enduring transformations. The empire will eventually lose territory, wealth, ports, and political reach, but the religious culture established during this period survives. Christianity becomes not a temporary court fashion, but a foundation of state identity in the northern Ethiopian highlands. There is also a sharper edge to the change. Once the monarchy defines itself through Christianity, religious difference can become political difference. Traditional worshippers, Jewish communities, and rival Christian groups may all be viewed through the needs of royal unity. The surviving sources rarely preserve the voices of those who resisted or simply continued older practices in private. The evidence remains incomplete, and the peaceful language of conversion should not conceal the pressures that often accompany a state's adoption of a new faith. Still, the cross does not erase the world that came before it. Grain stalks remain on coins. Aksumite language continues. Royal portraits endure. The highland state absorbs Christianity into its own traditions rather than dissolving into a foreign culture. The disc and crescent disappear from the crown's money, but Aksum does not become less African or less imperial. It becomes something more difficult to classify an African Christian empire standing between Rome, Arabia, the Nile, and the Indian Ocean, carrying a faith from the Mediterranean into a landscape where it will develop a history entirely its own. Once Christianity becomes part of Aksumite kingship, the Red Sea is no longer only a commercial corridor, it becomes a political and religious frontier. Across the water, southern Arabia contains wealthy ports, fertile highlands, incense routes, rival dynasties, Jewish communities, Christian congregations, and rulers struggling to control the kingdoms of Himyar and Saba. Aksum has traded with this world for centuries, but by the 5th and 6th centuries its rulers are prepared to intervene there directly. The empire that once looked eastward from the African shore now sends armies across the sea. Southern Arabia is valuable because it commands the narrow approaches to the Red Sea and the routes leading toward the Indian Ocean. A power established there can influence trade moving between Egypt, East Africa, Arabia, and India. The highlands of Yemen also support agriculture through elaborate systems of terraces, dams, and seasonal water control. Cities and caravan stations profit from incense, textiles, spices, and the taxation of merchants. Control of this region offers both prestige and revenue, but it also draws Aksum into a political landscape far more difficult to dominate than a coastal port. Aksumite influence in Arabia appears before the most famous invasion. Coins, inscriptions, and royal titles suggest repeated involvement across the sea. Some Aksumite kings claim authority over Himyar and Saba, though scholars still debate whether these titles represent direct occupation, temporary military success, tribute relationships, or inherited formulas of kingship. At times, African troops or allied communities may have remained in Arabia after campaigns, becoming part of the local political struggle. The balance changes dramatically in the early 6th century. Himyar, the dominant kingdom of southern Arabia, comes under the rule of Yusuf Asar Yathar, widely known in later sources as Du Nuas. He is associated with Judaism, though the exact relationship between his personal faith, royal policy, and the diverse Jewish communities of Arabia remains complex. His rise occurs in a region where religion and international politics have become tightly entangled. Christian groups can look toward Aksum and Byzantium for support, while Jewish rulers may seek independence from those Christian powers or diplomatic space within Persia's sphere. The most notorious episode takes place at Najran, an important oasis and trading centre with a substantial Christian community. Sources describe the persecution and killing of Christians there, events later remembered as a martyrdom. The surviving accounts differ in detail and are shaped by religious polemic, but inscriptions and external texts support the conclusion that serious violence occurred. Churches were attacked, and opponents of the Himyarite ruler were executed. The precise number of victims remains uncertain, and later traditions likely magnify some elements. Yet the crisis is real enough to provoke international reaction. For Aksum, the persecution offers both a religious justification and a strategic opportunity. Its king, Caleb, presents intervention as the defense of fellow Christians. Across the wider Christian world, this framing gives the campaign moral force. The Byzantine emperor Justin the Kippur and later Justinian's government view events in Arabia through their own rivalry with the Persian Empire. A friendly Christian regime in Yemen could protect Red Sea commerce, weaken Persian influence, and perhaps create an alternative route for Eastern luxury goods that bypasses Persian-controlled networks. Aksum and Byzantium therefore share interests, but they are not equals in command. The Aksumite king controls the army that must cross the sea, land on hostile shores, and fight through southern Arabian terrain. Byzantine support may include diplomacy, ships, advice, or encouragement. But the scale and exact nature of assistance remain debated. No single explanation fully accounts for the logistical success of the invasion. Moving a large force across the Red Sea requires extraordinary preparation. Troops, weapons, animals, water, and food must be loaded onto vessels not necessarily designed for mass transport. Timing matters because winds and currents can scatter a fleet. Horses may panic in confined holds. Ships must land where beaches, harbours, and local allies make disembarkation possible. An army vulnerable at the shoreline could be destroyed before it forms ranks. Caleb's expedition succeeds. Aksumite forces defeat Dunuas, whose final fate is uncertain. Later tradition describes him riding into the sea rather than surrendering, but this dramatic image cannot be verified. What can be said with more confidence is that Himyarite rule is overturned and a Christian-aligned regime is installed under Aksumite protection. Caleb's victory marks the height of Aksum's power across the Red Sea. An African king has invaded Arabia, removed a ruler, and placed himself at the centre of an international Christian struggle. His authority is recognized far beyond the Ethiopian highlands. Yet victory creates a new problem. Conquering Yemen is easier than governing it from across the sea. A local Christian ruler is placed on the throne, but Aksumite soldiers remain influential. Among their commanders is Abrahah, a figure who eventually rebels against the authority of Caleb's chosen administration. Abrahah establishes himself as the effective ruler of Yemen, defeating or outmaneuvering forces sent to remove him. Although he may continue to acknowledge Aksumite supremacy in formal terms, his regime becomes increasingly independent. This reveals the limits of maritime empire. Distance weakens command. A general with troops, money, and local alliances can become more powerful than the king who appointed him. Messages take time to cross the sea. Reinforcements are expensive. Arabian nobles may cooperate with Aksum when useful, and abandon it when circumstances change. What survives in the record suggests that Aksum's control over Yemen shifts from occupation toward a looser relationship, centered on Christian alignment and nominal allegiance. Abraha nevertheless continues the regional Christian project. Inscriptions record campaigns and major repairs to the Marib Dam, one of Arabia's most important engineering works. He also builds a grand church at Sana'a, apparently intended to rival established pilgrimage centers. Later Islamic tradition associates him with an expedition toward Mecca involving war elephants, remembered in the story of the Year of the Elephant. The historical core of that event remains debated, and the surviving evidence does not allow every later detail to be confirmed. For Byzantium, Aksumite and Abrahan influence in Yemen appears promising but ultimately fails to transform the trade balance as hoped. Persian power remains strong, and merchants continue to follow routes shaped by price, security, and established relationships rather than imperial plans. Soon after Abraha's death, southern Arabia becomes unstable again. Persian intervention eventually removes the Aksumite-aligned order and draws Yemen into the Sasanian sphere. Aksum's Arabian adventure leaves a powerful impression but no permanent province. It demonstrates naval reach, military ambition, and religious confidence. Yet it also consumes resources and exposes the fragility of rule across water. The empire stood beside Byzantium, confronted rulers connected to rival faiths, and shaped the politics of Arabia. It has also learned that the Red Sea can carry armies in both directions. But it cannot guarantee obedience once those armies reach the opposite shore. For a brief period, Aksum appears to command both African highlands and Arabian kingdoms. Its king is a defender of Christianity, its coins circulate internationally, and its soldiers influence the route between two continents. The empire has entered the eastern struggle of Rome, Persia, and Arabia. In doing so, it comes closer than ever to the rank of the ancient world's greatest powers, and closer to the rivalries that will eventually reshape the entire region. The Arabian campaigns place Aksum inside a political world usually described through Rome and Persia, but the empire of the Northern Horn is not merely standing at the edge of their rivalry. By the 6th century, it is one of the powers capable of shaping events across the Red Sea. Byzantine emperors send envoys to its court, Arabian rulers fear its armies, merchants recognize its gold, Christian communities look toward it for protection. From the highlands, Aksum appears neither provincial nor isolated. It is part of the late ancient balance of power. A Byzantine writer named Procopius records an embassy sent to the Aksumite king during the reign of Justinian. The emperor hopes to persuade Aksum and its allies in Arabia to weaken Persian control over eastern trade. Silk, spices, gemstones, and other luxury goods move through routes in which Persian merchants hold considerable influence. Byzantium wants alternative channels. Aksum, positioned between African resources and the Indian Ocean, seems a natural partner. The plan reveals how highly the empire is regarded. Constantinople does not approach Aksum as a remote curiosity. It treats the kingdom as a state with enough commercial reach and military power to effect an imperial struggle. Yet diplomacy is built from conflicting interests. Byzantium wants Aksumite cooperation against Persia. Aksum wants prestige, secure trade, and influence in Arabia. The two Christian powers share a religion, but they do not share identical priorities. Aksum does not become a client of Rome or Byzantium simply because it adopts Christianity. Its kings mint their own coins, maintain their own army, and use foreign alliances selectively. The empire accepts bishops linked to Alexandria, but political authority remains rooted in the Highland monarchy. Religious connection creates communication, not obedience. Aksum's international reputation is strengthened by the way ancient writers classify it. In one famous passage, the 3rd century Persian religious thinker Mani is reported to have counted Aksum among the great kingdoms of the world, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. The exact wording and transmission require caution, but its survival is revealing. Aksum has become visible enough to be imagined within a global political order. Its claim to greatness rests on several foundations. Gold coinage places it within international commerce. Control of Adulis gives access to Red Sea shipping. Agricultural production supports a substantial inland population. Military campaigns reach the Nile and Arabia. Christian kingship connects the monarchy with powerful religious networks. Monumental architecture demonstrates the ability to mobilize labor on a scale foreign visitors cannot easily dismiss. Yet Aksum's power is different from Rome's. It does not rule a Mediterranean filled with paved highways, enormous cities, and permanent legions stationed across thousands of miles. Its authority is concentrated around strategic routes, tribute zones, fertile highlands, and ports. It relies heavily on relationships with local rulers and allied communities. This makes the empire flexible, but it also makes distant control vulnerable. Nor does Aksum resemble Sasanian Persia exactly. Persia commands vast agricultural plains, fortified cities, cavalry armies, and a bureaucratic tradition extending across Western Asia. Aksum's strength comes from altitude, trade corridors, naval access, and the ability to connect ecological zones. Its armies move through mountains, deserts, and coastal lands where local knowledge matters as much as formal organization. The differences do not make Aksum less imperial. They reveal that ancient empires can take many forms. Rome turns the Mediterranean into an internal sea. Persia dominates overland routes across Asia. Aksum links highland Africa to the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. Its power grows from controlling transitions coast to plateau, Africa to Arabia, caravan to ship, local surplus to international exchange. One lesser-known detail is that elephants may have contributed to Aksum's reputation, even when they were not central to battlefield tactics. African elephants and ivory are closely associated with the region in foreign imagination. Royal access to such animals projects command over landscapes beyond Mediterranean reach. Later traditions concerning war elephants in Arabia may exaggerate their use, but the symbolic connection between Aksum, elephants, and imperial power is strong. The kingdom's coins send a similar message. Roman and Persian rulers use currency to circulate their portraits and divine claims. Aksumite kings do the same, but with designs and inscriptions rooted in their own court. When a gold coin bearing an African monarch reaches a foreign market, it compresses diplomacy into metal. It announces that the issuing state possesses not only gold, but the authority to define its value. Christianity adds another layer to this competition. Byzantine emperors view themselves as protectors of the Christian world, but Aksumite kings can make a parallel claim in Africa and Arabia. Caleb's intervention in Yemen demonstrates that a Christian ruler outside the Roman Empire can wage war in defense of believers and reshape another kingdom. The action increases Aksum's prestige while complicating Byzantine assumptions about leadership. Doctrinal disputes create further tension. Christianity in Egypt and Aksum develops along lines that differ from the theology promoted by Constantinople after the Council of Chalcedon. The precise impact on 6th century diplomacy remains debated, but shared faith does not erase theological disagreement. Aksum's religious connections run most strongly through Alexandria, not directly through the imperial church of Byzantium. Persia watches these alliances with concern. Sasanian rulers have commercial and political interests in Arabia, and a Christian Aksumite presence near the entrance to the Red Sea threatens their influence. The Persian takeover of Yemen near the end of the 6th century therefore represents more than a local change of dynasty. It marks a shift in the regional contest among Aksum, Byzantium, and Persia. For a time, Aksum stands close enough to the centre of that contest to matter in every direction. It can negotiate with emperors, invade across the sea, and present its king as a ruler whose authority is recognised beyond Africa. But great power status comes with costs. Campaigns drain treasuries. Distant garrisons become unreliable. Trade routes shift according to forces no single kingdom can control. The empire's challenge to Rome is therefore not a single war. It is the challenge of existence, an African state minting gold, speaking through Greek and Ge'ez, defending Christianity, and intervening in the same strategic world claimed by Mediterranean and Persian emperors. Aksum does not defeat Rome, nor does Rome conquer Aksum. They face one another across diplomacy, trade, faith, and ambition. At its height, the kingdom proves that the ancient world has more than 2 imperial centres, yet the networks that elevate Aksum are beginning to change. The Red Sea that carries its merchants and armies will soon be reorganised by new powers, and the empire's greatest strength, its place between worlds, will become increasingly difficult to defend. The first signs of contraction do not arrive as a single catastrophe. There is no surviving account of one final battle at the gates of Aksum, no inscription announcing that the empire has entered its last age, and no layer of destruction showing that the capital suddenly burned from end to end. Instead, the kingdom begins to weaken through a series of changes that overlap, reinforce one another, and remain frustratingly difficult to separate. Trade becomes less predictable. Arabian influence is lost. Coinage declines. Political authority appears to narrow. The empire does not disappear in one dramatic collapse. It becomes smaller, quieter, and increasingly distant from the commercial world that once made its wealth possible. The loss of Yemen is an important warning. Persian forces established control across southern Arabia near the end of the 6th century, breaking the Aksumite-aligned political order that Caleb's invasion had created. Aksum no longer influences both shores of the Red Sea in the same way. Its rulers lose access to tribute, allies, and strategic positions in Arabia. More importantly, Persian influence threatens the networks connecting the Red Sea with the Indian Ocean. The empire still possesses a Adulis, but control of one port means less when the commercial system beyond it is being redirected by stronger competitors. Then the wider region changes again with extraordinary speed. During the early 7th century, the armies of the newly formed Islamic State expand out of Arabia. Within decades, Byzantine control of Egypt collapses, the Sasanian Empire disappears, and Muslim rulers command much of the eastern Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, and the Arabian Peninsula. The political map surrounding Aksum is transformed. The rise of Islam does not necessarily produce an immediate hostile blockade against the Christian kingdom. Early Islamic tradition remembers that some of Muhammad's followers sought refuge in Aksum, where a just ruler protected them from persecution. The details and chronology remain debated, but the memory suggests respect rather than automatic enmity. Aksum may initially maintain workable relations with the new powers across the sea. Even so, the economic consequences are profound. Old Byzantine commercial networks weaken or change ownership. Persian roots are absorbed into a new political system. Arabian ports develop under different authorities. Muslim merchants increasingly dominate Red Sea and Indian Ocean commerce. Aksum is no longer positioned between familiar rivals whose needs had once made the kingdom a valuable Christian ally. The entire system around it has been reorganized. Adulis appears to decline during this period, though the timing remains uncertain. The port may have suffered from conflict, changing coastlines, sedimentation, reduced trade, or a gradual shift toward other harbours. Some later traditions describe destructive attacks, but archaeology does not yet provide a simple account of one decisive event. What survives in the record suggests contraction rather than instant abandonment. The loss of reliable maritime income would have affected the monarchy at every level. Fewer customs payments mean fewer resources for soldiers, officials, churches, and elite households. Imported goods become rarer. The ability to reward subordinate rulers declines. Gold coinage, once one of Aksum's proudest signs of international status, eventually ceases. Later rulers continue to issue some silver and bronze coins, but even these disappear by roughly the 7th century. The end of coinage is both practical and symbolic. A state may stop minting because precious metal is scarce, foreign trade has declined, or political authority no longer reaches far enough to guarantee currency. Coins can continue circulating after mints close, and barter remains important throughout the empire's history, so the change does not mean the economy simply stops. Yet the disappearance of new royal money shows that Aksum is no longer communicating with the wider world in the same way. Environmental pressure may also contribute. The highlands around Aksum have supported farming, livestock, construction, and dense settlement for centuries. Trees are cut for fuel, buildings, tools, and agricultural expansion. Fields are cultivated repeatedly. Heavy seasonal rains can wash exposed soil from slopes once vegetation is removed. Terracing and careful land management reduce the damage, but they require labour and political stability. Some scholars have argued that deforestation and soil exhaustion undermine the agricultural base of the capital. Pollen studies, sediments, and regional environmental evidence suggest significant human alteration of the landscape. Though the scale and timing remain debated, it is tempting to imagine a simple ecological collapse in which exhausted soil destroys the empire, but no single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. Farmers adapt crops, move fields, rebuild terraces, and change settlement patterns. Environmental stress becomes most dangerous when combined with political and commercial decline. Climate may have added further pressure. Shifts in rainfall could reduce harvests or make them less predictable. Several poor seasons in succession would weaken food reserves, increase livestock losses, and encourage migration. A monarchy already receiving less revenue from trade would have fewer resources to relieve famine or maintain loyalty. Yet reconstructing local climate conditions with precision is difficult, and broad regional patterns do not always reveal what happens in one highland basin. Disease is another possible factor. Aksum's connection to long-distance trade exposes it to epidemics moving through ports and caravan routes. The Great Plague associated with the reign of Justinian spreads through parts of the Mediterranean and Near East beginning in the 6th century. Whether it reaches Aksum in a devastating form is unknown. The absence of written testimony does not prove safety, but neither does the empire's commercial connection prove a major outbreak. The evidence remains incomplete. Political fragmentation becomes more visible as the old system weakens. Local rulers who once benefited from Aksumite trade may have less reason to obey a distant king. Tributary regions can drift away. Military commanders can become independent. Communities along the coast may align themselves with emerging Muslim trading networks. While highland leaders focus increasingly on local agriculture and religious authority, the capital itself appears to lose population and economic importance. Monumental construction declines. Elite compounds are abandoned or reused. Royal power may shift southward or into more defensible areas, though the details are uncertain. Aksum remains sacred and politically meaningful, but it is no longer the unrivaled centre of an international empire. Popular explanations sometimes blame the decline on a single foreign conquest, a sudden environmental disaster, or the legendary Queen Gudit, who is said in later Ethiopian traditions to have attacked churches and overthrown an established order. These stories may preserve memories of genuine conflict, but they were recorded long after the events and cannot be treated as straightforward chronicles. The figure of Gudit remains one of the great mysteries of Ethiopian historical tradition, possibly combining several episodes into one destructive legend. Aksum's contraction is better understood as a long unravelling. The loss of Arabia reduces strategic reach. Persian, and then Islamic expansion reshape commerce. Adulis weakens. Coinage ends. Environmental stress complicates agriculture. Local rulers gain independence. Each pressure makes the others harder to resist. Yet contraction is not the same as extinction. People continue to live in the highlands. Churches remain active. Ge'ez survives as a sacred language. Royal traditions adapt to a world no longer centred on the Red Sea. The ancient empire is withdrawing from the international stage, but the civilization it created is preparing to survive in another form. As Aksum's ports grow quieter and its coins disappear from circulation, the civilization does not simply vanish into the highlands. The old imperial machinery contracts, but the political and religious traditions created by the kingdom continue moving through a changing landscape. Power shifts away from the ancient capital. Trade becomes more regional, and rulers govern territories smaller than those claimed by Ezana or Caleb. Yet the idea of Aksum survives. It remains a sacred source of legitimacy, a memory of Christian kingship, and a foundation on which later Ethiopian states will build their authority. The city itself continues to be inhabited. Farmers cultivate the surrounding fields, clergy maintain churches, and pilgrims visit places associated with ancient rulers and sacred traditions. Monumental compounds may fall into ruin, but their stones are not meaningless. Some are reused in later construction. Others remain visible as reminders of a period when the highlands commanded routes stretching toward the Nile and Arabia. The towering stelae still stand above the burial grounds, though the beliefs that produced them have changed. Royal authority appears to move southward during the centuries following Aksum's decline, perhaps toward regions where agriculture, security, and new political alliances offer greater advantages. The exact sequence remains uncertain because written records are sparse and archaeological evidence is uneven. Kings may continue to claim descent from Aksumite rulers even when they no longer govern from Aksum itself. The capital becomes less important as an administrative centre while growing more powerful as a symbol. This transformation is common in long-lived civilizations. A city can lose its markets and armies yet gain sacred importance. Rome continued to shape European political imagination after its Western emperors disappeared. Meroe remained present through the traditions of later Nubian kingdoms. In the same way, Aksum becomes more than a location. It becomes an ancestral age against which later rulers measure themselves. Christianity is the strongest bridge between the ancient empire and the states that follow it. Churches survive where palaces are abandoned. Monasteries appear in remote valleys and mountain landscapes, preserving texts, training clergy, and maintaining networks between scattered communities. Religious institutions can endure political fragmentation because they do not depend entirely on one royal court. A monastery supported by local farmers and landowners may survive the fall of a dynasty that once protected it. Gaze also continues, though it gradually changes from an everyday spoken language into a language of scripture, worship, scholarship, and royal ceremony. This shift gives it unusual durability. Spoken languages evolve into forms that later become associated with Tigrinya, Tigra, and Amharic, while Ge'ez remains preserved in religious texts. A language once carved onto victory inscriptions now carries biblical translations, prayers, hymns, chronicles, and theological works. The survival of Ge'ez means that later generations can still encounter the intellectual world developed under and after Aksumite rule. Manuscripts are copied by hand, each copy vulnerable to fire, war, moisture, insects, and human error. Texts change slightly as scribes reproduce them, yet the tradition continues. What had once served the needs of an expanding empire becomes the sacred archive of a Christian civilization. Architectural memory survives as well. Later Ethiopian churches continue to use features rooted in Aksumite construction, including raised platforms, alternating stone and timber elements, projecting wooden beams, and carefully layered masonry. Even when new political centres arise far from the old capital, buildings carry visual echoes of Aksum. The ancient style becomes part of a living tradition, rather than a dead archaeological category. Religious stories deepen the city's importance. Aksum becomes associated with the Ark of the Covenant, which Ethiopian tradition holds was brought from Jerusalem and eventually housed at the Church of St. Mary of Zion. The historical origins of this belief are difficult to establish, and scholars still debate when the full tradition took shape. There is no archaeological evidence confirming the presence of the biblical Ark. Yet the importance of the story lies in what it does for Ethiopian sacred history. It places Aksum within the spiritual geography of the Bible. The Highland Kingdom is no longer only a convert at the edge of the Christian world. It becomes the guardian of an ancient covenant and the heir to a sacred lineage. Later traditions connect Ethiopian kings to Solomon and the Queen of Sheba through their son Menelik. These claims are recorded most fully in the medieval work known as the Kebra Nagast, written long after Imperial Aksum's height. But they transform the memory of the ancient kingdom into a central pillar of royal legitimacy. The rulers of later Ethiopian dynasties do not need to reproduce Aksum's exact institutions to inherit its authority. They need to present themselves as restorers or continuators of the Christian monarchy that began there. Coronations, genealogies, church patronage, and sacred history all reinforce this connection. Aksum becomes the place where legitimate kingship is imagined to have entered its enduring form. The transition is not peaceful or uninterrupted. Later centuries bring competing dynasties, regional warfare, population movement, religious conflict, and changing economic centres. A dynasty commonly known as the Zagwe rises after the older Aksumite political order, ruling from regions farther south. Its kings commission extraordinary rock-hewn churches, most famously at Lalibela. These monuments belong to a later period, but they continue the ambition to express Christian kingship through transformed stone. When the so-called Solomonic dynasty takes power in the 13th century, its rulers claim to restore a line descending from ancient Aksumite and biblical kings. The claim serves political needs, especially in competition with the Zagwe, whose legitimacy is challenged. Historical continuity is therefore partly real and partly constructed. Institutions, language, religion, and architectural traditions endure, but genealogies are shaped to justify new rulers. This does not make the legacy false. Civilizations survive through selective memory. Later societies preserve what remains useful, sacred, beautiful, or politically powerful. They forget some rulers, reinvent others, and connect broken periods through stories that provide meaning where the evidence is incomplete. Aksum's greatest survival may be the political independence of the Highland Christian tradition itself, surrounded over time by expanding Muslim states and changing trade networks. The Ethiopian kingdoms remain connected to the wider world but retain a distinct religious and royal identity. They negotiate, fight, trade, and exchange ideas with neighbouring Muslim communities, rather than existing in complete isolation. The boundary between Christian highlands and surrounding regions is never absolute. The empire that once faced Rome no longer possesses gold mints or Arabian provinces. Its port has faded, its royal tombs have been robbed, and the names of many kings have disappeared, yet its church, script, sacred geography, architectural language, and idea of monarchy continue. Aksum survives not because nothing changes, but because its descendants transform what the empire leaves behind. By the time foreign travellers and modern archaeologists begin trying to reconstruct the ancient kingdom, they find a civilization that has never been entirely forgotten by the people living among its ruins. The mystery is not why Aksum vanished, it is how so much of Aksum remained alive after the empire itself was gone. For centuries, the ruins of Aksum remain visible without being fully understood. Farmers pass weathered stone platforms on their way to fields. Priests serve churches built near the remains of palaces and tombs. Pilgrims approach St. Mary of Zion carrying traditions that connect the city to biblical kings and sacred objects. The great stelae continue to rise above the landscape, too large to ignore, yet the identities of the rulers beneath them have already faded. Aksum is never entirely forgotten by the people living around it. What disappears is the wider world's understanding of what the city once represented. Foreign visitors who reach the Ethiopian highlands encounter monuments unlike those familiar from Egypt or the Mediterranean. Some attempt to explain them through biblical stories, others imagine forgotten colonies from Arabia, ancient Israel, or distant Mediterranean civilizations. The possibility that an African kingdom had independently created monumental architecture, international coinage, and a far-reaching imperial state is often pushed aside by assumptions brought from outside. Early European accounts describe the stelae, churches, inscriptions, and local traditions, but their observations are uneven. Travellers depend on interpreters, political permission, and routes through difficult territory. Some preserve useful details about structures later damaged or destroyed. Others repeat rumours and misunderstand local histories. Aksum becomes a place onto which outsiders project their expectations. The study of its coins gradually changes the picture. Gold, silver, and bronze issues bearing royal portraits and Greek or Ge'ez inscriptions provide names of kings absent from later chronicles. Their symbols reveal the transition from older religious traditions to Christianity. Their discovery in Arabia and around the Red Sea confirms that Aksum participated in international trade rather than existing as an isolated highland court. Inscriptions add another layer: Ezana's victory texts, multilingual royal proclamations, and records connected to a duelist demonstrate that Aksum's rulers thought and acted on an imperial scale. Archaeology uncovers elite buildings, burial chambers, imported ceramics, glass vessels, workshops, reservoirs, and evidence of a long-distance exchange. Piece by piece, the city reappears not as a biblical curiosity, but as the capital of a complex African state. Yet interpretation remains contested. Earlier archaeologists often placed overwhelming emphasis on South Arabian influence, treating highland civilization as the result of migration from across the Red Sea. Later research recognizes a much stronger indigenous African foundation. Contacts with Arabia remain essential, but they no longer provide a complete explanation. Scholars still debate the balance between migration, trade, local development, and cultural exchange. The chronology of Aksum presents further problems. Coin sequences provide relative order, but many reigns remain difficult to date precisely. Royal titles sometimes describe territories controlled only briefly. Inscriptions celebrate victories while concealing defeats. Tombs rarely preserve the names of their occupants. Even the city's population at its height cannot be estimated with confidence. The evidence remains incomplete. And every new excavation has the potential to revise assumptions that once seemed secure. Modern archaeology has also been shaped by political events. The region containing Aksumite remains is divided between Ethiopia and Eritrea. While the ancient empire itself existed long before modern borders, important sites lie on both sides. A duelist stands in Eritrea, the capital stands in Ethiopia. Yeha and other early highland centres form part of a cultural landscape extending across the northern horn of Africa. This shared inheritance can become sensitive when modern national narratives seek clear ownership of an ancient civilization. Aksum occupies a central place in Ethiopian history, especially through Christianity, royal traditions, and the sacred authority of the old capital. At the same time, much of its coastal territory, trade infrastructure, and archaeological record lies within modern Eritrea. The empire belongs historically to a connected region that modern political divisions cannot neatly contain. The great standing stele itself became entangled in 20th century conflict. During the Italian occupation of Ethiopia, one monumental stele was removed from Aksum and taken to Rome. Its transportation required cutting it into sections, carrying the pieces to the coast, and shipping them across the Mediterranean. In Italy, it was reassembled as a symbol of fascist conquest. For Ethiopians, the monument's removal represented more than archaeological theft. It was the seizure of a visible link to an independent African imperial past by a European regime seeking to claim its own modern empire. After decades of negotiation, the stele was eventually returned to Ethiopia, transported back in sections, and re-erected at Aksum. Its return transformed an ancient funerary monument into a modern symbol of memory, sovereignty, and cultural restoration. The episode reflects the strange afterlife of Aksumite monuments. Stones raised for forgotten kings become instruments of colonial propaganda, then emblems of national survival. Their meanings continue to change because the societies around them continue to change. Aksum also complicates familiar accounts of world history. Ancient history is often organized around Greece, Rome, Egypt, Persia, India, and China, leaving northeastern Africa as a margin between better-known centers. Aksum refuses that position. It mints gold coins recognized by foreign merchants. It negotiates with Byzantine emperors. It invades Arabia, campaigns toward the Nile, adopts Christianity early, and controls a commercial corridor connecting the Mediterranean with the Indian Ocean. Its history also challenges the idea that Africa entered global exchange only through later European contact. Aksum's merchants and rulers were already operating within long-distance networks nearly 2,000 years ago. African ivory reached Mediterranean markets. Roman glass climbed into the highlands. Indian Ocean goods passed through Red Sea ports. Languages, religions, technologies, and political ideas moved in several directions. Yet Aksum should not be remembered only for resembling other empires. Its significance lies equally in what was distinct: its raised palaces, carved stelae, Ge'ez inscriptions, grain-framed coins, highland agriculture, and a relationship between inland capital and coastal port belonged to a political system shaped by the Horn of Africa. Aksum participated in the ancient world without becoming a copy of it. Much remains buried beneath fields, villages, churches, and sedimented coastlines. Excavation is slow, funding is uneven, and conflict can interrupt research for years. Archaeologists must also work around sacred spaces that remain active rather than treating the entire landscape as an abandoned ruin. The city is both an archaeological site and a living religious center. The unanswered questions are part of Aksum's power. The names beneath the greatest stelae remain unknown. The precise relationship between early highland states and the later empire is unresolved. The decline of Adulis is still debated. The location of some royal capitals and battlefields remains uncertain. Even the routes by which gold and ivory reached the kingdom are only partly reconstructed. What survives is enough to restore Aksum to the scale it deserves, but not enough to remove all mystery. It stands as one of the ancient world's major civilizations, an African empire whose rulers placed their faces on gold and sent their armies across seas. It challenged the powers of its age not by imitating Rome, but by controlling a different center of the world. The evening light settles slowly over the highland basin. Shadows gather beneath the standing stelae, and the carvings on their stone facades become harder to see. Far beyond the city, the roads that once carried ivory, gold, wine, soldiers, bishops, and royal messengers have faded into fields and modern tracks. The sea remains to the east, but the sails that linked Aksum with Egypt, Arabia, and India disappeared many centuries ago. Civilizations often imagine that power will preserve memory. Kings carve titles into stone, stamp their faces into gold, and build monuments too heavy to move. Yet titles become unreadable. Coins fall beneath floors. Tombs are opened. Ports fill with sediment. Even a monument weighing hundreds of tons can break and lie silent beside the grave it was meant to protect. Aksum endured differently. Its empire contracted, but its language entered prayer. Its capital weakened, but became sacred. Its royal history blurred, but later kingdoms continued to draw authority from its name. The civilization survived not as an unchanged political machine, but as a collection of traditions carried forward by people who lived among its remains. That survival is quieter than conquest, but perhaps more remarkable. Rome's emperors no longer rule from Rome. Persia's great dynasties have passed. The kingdoms of ancient Arabia were transformed beyond recognition, yet in the highlands, churches still preserve Ge'ez texts, pilgrims still travel toward Aksum, and the old stones remain part of a living landscape. The empire's gold once crossed oceans and announced the authority of kings whose portraits were known in distant ports. Today those coins rest behind glass or emerge unexpectedly from the soil, small enough to disappear in a closed hand. They remind us that greatness does not always leave behind a complete history. Sometimes it leaves scattered fragments, each one carrying part of a world. And as darkness gathers over the broken palaces and standing pillars, Aksum remains where it has always been above the Red Sea, between continents, holding its secrets in stone, while the mountains quietly keep watch over the memory of an African empire that once considered Rome its equal.